The Lethbridge Public Library acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The city of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for Chapter and Verse, a trio of Alberta poets with Bertrand, Bickersteth, Dallas Hunt, and Nisha Patel. So Bertrand was born in Sierra Leone, but grew up in Calgary, Edmonton, and Olds, Alberta. After an English degree at UBC, Bertrand continued studying in the UK and later taught in the US, returning to Alberta later. Alberta has provided him with new insights on Black identity, and most of his writing has been committed to these perspectives ever since. Although he writes in several genres, anticlimactically, the topic is always the same. What does it mean to be Black and from the prairies? He's also given many talks, including a TED Talk for Bow Valley College called The Weight of Words. His poetry has appeared in several publications, including most recently the Antagonist Review, Cosmonauts Avenue, and the Fieldstone Review. He's also been published in the Great Black North, the forthcoming anthology, The Black Prairie Archives, and in 2018, he was longlisted for the CBC Poetry Prize. He lives in Calgary and teaches at Olds College and writes everywhere. So we also have Dallas Hunt today. Dallas Hunt is Cree and a member of the Swan River First Nation in Treaty 8 territory in Northern Alberta. He has creative work published in Contemporary Verse 2, Prairie Fire, Prism International, and Arc Poetry. His first children's book, WOTS and the World Hispanic, was published through Higher Press in 2018 and was nominated for several awards. Hunt is assistant professor of Indigenous literature at the University of British Columbia. And then finally, we have Nisha Patel. Nisha is a queer spoken word poet and artist. She's the City of Edmonton's 8th Poet Laureate and 2019's Canadian Individual Slam Champion. She's a prominent organizer and community builder, having worked in the festivals across Canada, participating in both the Canadian Festival of Spoken Word and the Canadian Individual Slam Championship. Chapbooks, Limited Success, Water, Edmonton Girl, and I See You have reached audiences around the world, and their discussions of family and grief, racism and feminism. Over the years, Nisha has led many workshops and performed from small-town Moose Jaw to metropolitan Seoul, South Korea, over the course of 4 national and international tours. With nearly 200 performances to date, Nisha is committed to furthering her goals of reaching audiences that need it and in the pursuit of excellence in spoken word. So thank you so much for joining us. Is it okay for one of you to jump on and start reading first? Bertrand, would you like to go first?
Sure. So, my video is on. That's not a problem at all. And maybe we can call it alphabetical order. Who knows? Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So thank you for that introduction. It's great to be here. It's unfortunate that we can't have the live events as we were hoping, but I really do appreciate the efforts that many different literary societies and literary people in general have been making to create these virtual spaces for us. And as much as I miss being out there with folks, I do appreciate the opportunity to, as a audience member, to engage with all these different events across the world that I wouldn't have had a chance to. So thank you very much. Word on the street, Lethbridge. I'm glad that you're keeping literature going. So as you pointed out in my intro, Caroline, most of my work is about dealing with Blackness and identity and prairie identity, particularly Alberta. And when I grew up in Alberta, there really was no such thing as Black history. In fact, today, people still are shocked when they hear the words Black history said together. So I want to read you a couple of short poems that have to do with my reckoning as I was growing up with what is this thing called Blackness, this Black identity, and how the tools I was given by my province as well as my parents often didn't help, but I had to find a way through it. So this first one is called The Wrongness of a Word. And its features a look at fields, which I just want to give a shout out to, fields, because in my collection of poems, a lot of people really enjoyed the rivers. There's a theme of rivers that go throughout it. And hey, I love rivers too. But there's also a look at fields here. And so I'm going to highlight those and give the rivers a rest. All right, the wrongness of a word. Now I'm looking at a field outside of Olds on the 2A somewhere after Didsbury or before Carstairs, somewhere, summer's height. Those swaying green giants will be cut for hay, and the aroma of their release will speak the certainty of its place. My eyes do not resist the gentle settling darkness, bespeak the settling darkness, pinks and oranges deepening in the sky, deeper still. My place is with the oncoming darkness of the night. It is funny how a word, even the wrongness of a word, can speak things into a simple and instant order, like the NIG that wrongly speaks of night. Its quiet deepening, still. Here I am again, laboring words over a vast simplicity I refuse to name as beauty. Night settles over these rippling fields. Beauty is black. And then I have one other short one that I'll give to you here. This one is a newer one. It was actually published in the Walrus a little while ago. So, you know, those of you who read the Walrus regularly, it's not new to you, okay? But it's a newer one. So if you haven't caught this one, here it is for you. It is called Soil. Now, let's look at a field in fall, half living, half leaving, half outward, half injured, quartered section of parceled land legally subdivided as playground, felled to basic firmament. Or you just tell those other kids, no, that black is beautiful, warble our parents with worse worn out words. But from here, face to floor, we see the molecular sophistry of soil, the ore of orphic, the no of chernism, the black of dark brown. Children, flat out, face to ground. Can we assemble this out? A field is just a fist side of a fact, caught out of season and found out in words and injured, and we swore we would stop looking at fields because they remind us so much of absence of beauty. It hurts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bertrand. That was beautiful. Dallas, would you like to go next? We're doing alphabetical.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. Here we go. Tansi Nita Temtek, Dallas Hunt Nagasan, Nia Omanejo, Egwa Wapasucipio Tania. So hi everyone, my name is Dallas Hunt. I'm Cree and a member of Swan River First Nation and Treaty 8 territory in Northern Alberta, Canada. And yeah, I'm reading from my new collection, Creeland. So if you want to pick it up, it's available, I'm sure. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to Bertrand and Nisha for sharing the floor with me here, but also to the organizers over there at Lethbridge and all the important work that you do. And just wanted to echo what Bertrand was saying about sort of literary festivals, sort of keeping this, keeping writers, afloat and just really, really sponsoring our work. So I'm just going to read, I think maybe, I have how much time? Sorry, Caroline?
I was thinking like 3 to 4 minutes.
3 to 4 minutes. Okay, that's perfect for me. Okay, I'm just going to read 2 poems and we're going to go from there. Here we go. So I'm going to read off my screen. My apologies. So this one was called, is called, I almost had a mental breakdown during my master's degree. But it's not what you think. It was quotidian daily life, the everyday. Then came the fruit flies. They cling clung to the fan above the stovetop, withered banana skins, Tupperware seal, half cracked. They were everywhere in the way a mind is when it approaches its end. In short, I needed to know what to do. I read a mom blog that said to mix a Melback with dish soap and to cover the lips of a wine glass with saran wrap, gentle piercings that swallow like open manholes littering the top. This would trap the flies, slow asphyxiation, and then 3 days pass. The flies still live in my territory rent free. In the corner of my basement suite, I find a spider, reason with it silently, quote, the inside of the glass, diplomacy, so that when the fruit fly tentatively enters through the saran wrap, abject exposure, it will be exposed, a sacred meal. In my mind, this makes sense, a deal done, a spit-soaked handshake. I lift the saran wrap, dump the spider in, gleefully expecting my kin, Kokomau, to stick to the side of the translucent container with one leg and grab the fly with the other. This is a conversation unhad, a plan unhatched. The spider slowly, gradually, painfully begins to slide in the direction of the cocktail of $17 Malbec and certain death I've engineered. The still current of grapes, sour grapes, and palm olive too strong for 8 limber legs to push through to kick toward a glass shoreline unreached. My best friend, the spider, tumbles into the top layer of dish soap before it hits the wine. Its trajectory, a crawl in slow motion, shaking tarsus, floats above, thick inebriant, sinking and eventually dying. My relation slips to their cherry plum raspberry acrid death. To make Malbec, you need to nurture grapes, shield them from frost, canopy growth, and unruly high yields. The last thing you want is a Malbec of good color, botanic in nature, so they say. Argentina is one of the largest producer of Malbec, and I hope if I can bear the flight path and my mind is clear, then I'll go there someday. Malbec for a heavy heart's content, hopeful remedy for swelling grief. I leave before the fruit flies do. And I have about a minute and a bit, so I'll just read this one. Apologies. This one is called Cree Dictionary. I wanted to read one I had never read before and then a new one. So Cree Dictionary, or this isn't new, sorry, my bad. Okay, the translation for joy in Cree is a fried bologna sandwich. The translation for bittersweet in Cree looks like a cows and plows payment 8 decades too late. The translation for patience in Cree is an auntie looking after 4 of her own children and 2 of her sisters. The translation for evil in Cree is the act of not calling your mother on a Sunday. The translation for expedition in Cree is traveling 20 minutes to the only gas station in Fost, Alberta to buy a high-guard pizza sub. The translation for success in Cree is executing the perfect frog splash on your younger brother. The Cree word for white man is unpaid child support. The translation for conflicted in Cree is your deep, steadfast love for country superstar Dwight Yoakam, or depending on the regional dialect, George Jones, Patsy Cline, or Blue Rodeo. The translation, or the Cree word for consolation is a Saskatoon berry bush in summertime. The translation for policeman in Cree is Mitsi Nitsukan Kokos. The translation for genius in Cree is my kukum muttering in her sleep. The Cree word for poetry is your 4-year-old niece's cracked lips spilling up broken syllables of now and the caps in her teeth. Hi. Thanks for listening to me read, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Dallas. That was really great. Nisha, is it okay if you go next?
Yeah. I don't know if my camera's gonna work, so I'm gonna try it. But if it gets choppy, just let me know and I'll turn it off again. So let's see how this goes. So I thought about reading from my book that is out now, Coconut, through New West Press, which is the same actually as Bertrand's publisher. And it came out this April, and it's been like a really exciting time to read from that book. But I almost feel like, if you want to read it, it's out there. And so I should read other stuff right now instead of just like promoting that book. So the book exists. You can get it from your library if you don't want to pay for it. If you hate it, please don't tell me. But instead, I'm going to read some of the poems I wrote actually just in the last 2 weeks, because that is what I want to share today and what I feel compelled to share. So I recently made my way across Canada to go to graduate school, like person as a in a while. And so this poem kind of came out of that experience. What constitutes an approved medical device? Some might say the umbilical cord, invented to start a life, lived only when severed, planned obsolescence, the liver, a dam, a stop on the Nile, passage cleared of crocodiles, refinement of energy, a generator powering a collapsing city star. The heart, an organ, playing loudly and unending, from hungry maw to funeral choir, an increasing, then diminishing return on investment, the arches of the feet, a bridge that collapses between inside and outside, the people who are allowed to go places and the people who are forced to stay home. I'd sell it for parts. Some already do. This body that rusts from the inside, the middle marrow in my spine pulsing in Ellen song, or I trade it in because sometimes pianos are devices too, not just the fingers that play them. Swollen without feeling will be one day when my red blood cells grow their spiky glucose halos and call my body their kingdom. It's the appendix that I pray to. If unapproved at the gate, I can simply leave it behind and keep boarding. And I'm going to share one more. This one was commissioned by the CBC, and the prompt that I was given was to write about the election. So I apologize to anyone who is tired of the election. As you know, it is a privilege to be able to ignore it. Interrupt your regular routine briefing with the news that we will no longer be taking questions. We end with the news that COVID-19 will no longer be taking. We interrupt your questions with the COVID-19 briefing that regular COVID-19 is no longer news requiring a briefing. Please note this is off the record. If you have any questions, please note that on-campus polling has been canceled because of the COVID-19 and that on-campus land grabs are still in effect and that on-campus vaccinations will be required to pay tuition. Mandatory vaccines and not tuition hike are the real youth issues. We interrupt to remind that there is no youth vote, just millennials without landlines. The youth vote is just a TikTok trend, not real leadership. Please note that TikTok is off the record. We interrupt your social media binge with the news that we will no longer be rescuing anyone else from Afghanistan. Please shelter in place if you think you're Canadian. Please note that the real Canadians have already been evacuated. Please note that this email was hard to write. Sincerely, best wishes, always. We interrupt your regular COVID-19 briefing with a snap election. We interrupt your majority government with flags at half-mast. We interrupt your virtue signaling with a balanced budget sewn into the seams of the poverty line. Please note that this is off the record. Please note that we strongly recommend masking in place. Please note that a vote for anyone but the party is a vote thrown down an abandoned mine shaft. Please note that if you point fingers in enough circles, it will start to tremble fists. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Nisha. That was really timely for what's coming up on Monday. So thank you so much for that. So I have some questions from the audience, but if anybody else would like to start typing in them, I will ask the panel and you guys can just sort of jump in or each answer it however you feel necessary. So the question is, listening to each poet reading style, speaking style is very different. Could you maybe speak on the differences on how you prepare your work, basically how you compare writing it versus how you perform your poetry?
Yeah, I can go first for that one. Because so much of my work is rooted in performance or sharing or like really public facing, I end up writing a lot of my work from an like an inside looking place, but with an explicit thought to audience and to sound and, you know, even how the body feels when you're writing it. And so many of my poems end up being shared out loud. And that goes into the writing process as well. Many times I will write out loud, or I will test out how things sound before I test out whether they're grammatically correct. And that plays a lot into what ends up on the page, which is often a translation.
Bertrand, do you want to go?
I can. It doesn't matter to me. Thank you. Unlike Nisha, I don't think about performance or anything like that when I'm writing, and I actually envy that position because as I was growing up, hip hop was a huge influence on me and on thinking about language and words. But I can't rap to save my life. I can't get in the flow, and so I never could go in that direction. So when I write, I am thinking primarily about language and how I can play with language and think about language. And I think these days, a lot of the thinking goes into how can I assert my place within this tradition, which has largely been hogged, for lack of a better word, by a Eurocentric perspective. So how do I force my way into that, into the text that has been established by other groups, by Eurocentric groups? And that's largely what I think of. When I perform, therefore, I've got nothing going on in my mind about how to perform or anything like that. But what I do find is very interesting is I'm surprised that when I read the poetry that for me was largely just going to be a textual performance, I find that there are some oral elements that lend themselves to performance. And that I often discover as I am reading. And I really wish, this is where I envy people like Nisha. I really wish that I had the discipline to actually just sit down and perform it a few times in advance so that I could exploit those elements. But essentially what happens is every single time it's a different game, every single time, because I don't rehearse it. I don't think about the performance. And so sometimes it comes out good and other times it sounds like poetry from the page.
Just to close off here, I actually really often don't really think that much about how I want my poetry read. I mean, as soon as it's written, it's sort of out of my hands. And so I sometimes will create or I'll just write poetry that I think sounds good in my head. And then when I perform it, that might not be the case at all. And so, and then you revisit, but sometimes it is. And so, but as somebody has a sort of general sort of interest in the way words sound and how they group together and stuff, like, the plosives or like bilabial words that sort of, P's and B's and stuff like that. It's just fun to play around with language at times and words and stuff like that. So I guess in a sense I do have an eye towards it, but I also, it's not my main thing. I just, I'm usually just trying to get it across a sort of narrative or sort of idea. So, but that's a great question. Thanks so much.
Perfect. We have another question. This is from Kayla. I'm trying to get more involved in the poetry community. Do you have any tips?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question clearly. Can you repeat it?
Oh, so Kayla was wondering, she wants to be more involved in the poetry community, and she was wondering if you guys have any tips for her of how she can get more involved.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know where you're based. So assuming you are based somewhere in the temporal universe that can access maybe the internet from, I would say the first thing to really find if there is an existing like open mic community or community stage or sharing opportunity that you can look into or that you can attend. And some of them might be called open mics. Some of them might be, just like meetups or regular sharing. So it kind of takes some sleuthing on your part. But depending on where you're located, I would say most communities do have writing circles, and really good places to start to look for them would be your local libraries, any writers in residence, cafes where there's often live events can be a good start, or if you know any other writers, and you can honestly just ask them if they have writing circles or if there's open groups that are available. That will actually get you a really great way into community, and you can form relationships that are meaningful to you from that place. Not just ones where you like read your poetry and go home, but ones where people will nurture you and give you feedback and teach you how to be a better writer. It's also a really great place when you have that community around you to festivals or things going on. And that's a really good place to start.
I don't actually have anything to add to that, because all of those answers that Nisha gave sound like exactly the sorts of things that you should do. One thing I will add to that is sometimes there is a tendency for us when we're starting out to feel like claiming poetry as something that we do or something we engage in is really beyond us, and that's kind of a false identity to have. And what I would encourage you to do is think of yourself as a poet. Think of yourself as someone who's interested in words and in language and getting involved in the poetry community. And then when you do, it'll just feel more natural, and it'll feel more natural to make all those connections that Nisha did. So that's all I'll add to that.
Yeah, and I would just simply say that, I often think my cookum and my mom, like my grandmother and my mom are poets. They don't actively write poetry, but they're engaged in poetic practices and a sort of poetics that I sort of is at least legible to me. And so, I would just say that I would write, and if what you're writing resonates with you, then you're engaging in sort of poetic practice there. And I know the impulse is to, sort of try to get a form of validation here. And to be honest, I never felt like I could write poetry until I was published in literary magazines. And so, which is my own sort of, insecurities and stuff like that. And I know that we all have them. So that could help if you want to pursue that. But I'm also of the opinion that, there are poets in all different sort of places. And it's just sort of trying to find a good place to dwell in and then produce poetry from. So however that makes sense to you, I think is the right thing to pursue.
Perfect, thank you. Somebody else is wondering, within your professional practice, how much of your time would you say is actually spent on creative work, and how much is dedicated to technical aspects like submitting to publications, events, networking, etc.? And what are the key aspects of, or what are the key non-poetry aspects of a poet's life?
Just be prepared to fill out a lot of forms. Like the forms are endless. I generally don't sleep all that much. So I'm up early, down late. And so if I'm up late, I might write, or early in the morning, I might write as well. So that's the sort of creative aspect of it. I usually write at those times. And then I would say about the sort of bureaucratic technological elements of it is that you're going to meet all these great people and it's going to be awesome. But there's also these sort of, like I'm a full-time professor. So I have, I have students, I got to do my like critical research and all that stuff. And so I have found, but it's fine. There's so many forms, but you get through them, and that's the best part, because you can get through forms. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound like I was complaining. All right.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I'll be perfectly honest. I wish I was creating more than I was working to make money to have time to create. Spend more time doing all the things that make me money to pay my rent and stuff like that. So that is grant applications, that is going into my day job, mentoring writers, teaching writers. And it's not to say that some of these other things aren't fulfilling, because many of them are magical and wonderful, but there is a lot of that grunt work. There's catching up on paperwork, there's making sure you're filling everything in and on time, and connecting with people. Back when I was still doing gigs in person, there would be kind of this endless coffee date where you would meet with someone about a show or an opportunity to write or commission. And sometimes it would fall through, and you're out 2 or 3 hours of the day that could have been spent writing. Ideally, I would love to not have to worry about these things. But in this world, I write where I can, and I usually write under pressure. I write when I have a deadline. I write when someone is like, hey, you need to submit this thing on time, or hey, this publisher needs this in right away. And the pressure honestly has produced some very fantastic work, because I'm like a stress-based human being. But you know what, like maybe in like an alternate universe where I don't have to write under stress, I'm able to produce things that hurt a little less to come out of me. And I dream of that one day and having that security. And it's something that I'm going to continue to work towards.
Again, I don't have very much to add to that, because the realities of the poetic practice and balancing it with administrative work have been very clearly articulated. I think what you're hearing there is, unlike, say, being the CEO of a bank, the kind of work that the writing does not automatically produce financial or economic security. And so you have to do those other things. You have to do the grant proposals. You have to do the networking and all those other things if you want that element of your life to survive. I've never sat down and actually calculated how much of my time goes to this and how much of my time goes to that. But I do know that naturally I like to write and I want to write. I am not a natural, grant filler outer. That's not anything that I naturally do. I don't naturally look up sources of funding and things like that, but you have to force yourself to do those things, and you do have to spend some time doing it. And also, I should point out, you actually have to learn it too. There's a lot of ins and outs to it that you don't know before you start doing it that are very beneficial to learn along the way. And here's where Nisha's response to the previous question is actually also useful, because if you can get connected to a community, a writing or poetic community, that also will help you out with learning the ins and outs of that sort of thing. So generally speaking, I think writers tend to do their writing work alongside of or despite having to do all this other stuff as well. And as Dallas suggested, sometimes it means you're doing it early in the morning or late at night. You have other jobs that you have to do in order to support it. But that's the way of this particular vocation. And as Nisha said, if maybe this was an alternate universe in which, maybe the environment was valued more and people understood what facts were and things like that. And poetry was actually equal to the CEO being a bank, then we wouldn't be faced with these kinds of requirements. But as it is, we don't live in that universe.
I would like to add that the amount that you put into your writing will vary, and it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. Like there are weeks where I spend 2 hours writing a poem that ends up being, something in my next collection, and weeks where I spend 20 hours writing to end up with 5 pages of fiction that I hate. So like it isn't like a direct route either. You can't just say like, oh, I'm going to do my 10,000 hours and suddenly become an expert. Obviously 10,000 hours will make you better at what you do, but it's not a direct route, and not everyone has the ability to do that. So it really just matters what works for you when it comes to your writing practice, and you getting to know yourself is part of that and takes time as well.
Yeah, I think the Malcolm Gladwell, like 10,000, I wish I wrote that, because it's such a convoluted way to say like practice, like just practice and you'll get good at something. And, but he's a millionaire and I'm not. Wish I thought of it Alan Iverson said it better, in my opinion, but yeah, I don't know. I just wish that, 10,000 hours. No, but I think that's a good point by Nisha too. And all the things that Bertrand was saying is that there are particular demands on you when you're writing, and some things are valued more than others. And so you have to place yourself within a sort of economy of value, or sort of, just paying attention to essentially what that grammar is, right, and what its rules are. And I think Nisha and Bertrand have really sort of outlined what that looks like, but also how you have these different sort of avenues into it. And you practice, you meet people, and you no, get out of here. Sorry, Siri came up. Oh no. And then Siri came up again because I keep saying Siri. Okay, you practice and you do the stuff. Okay, sorry, thanks.
Thanks, Giles. Thanks, everyone. So I think we have time for one more question. And the question was, how do you, like, each of you has published a work of poetry. So how is the process of putting together that work? Do you start with a single poem and then sort of build from there? Or do you kind of, pick things that you've been working on and kind of put it together as a collection? What does that process look like?
I can go first with this one. I'm sure it's different for everyone. For me, it was a matter of writing a number of poems, slowly gathering momentum and slowly building a collection of poems over time. And I never really had a complete vision of what ultimately that would look like. And in fact, I'm going to go back to my unjust Albertan upbringing, because frankly, I never envisioned myself as a poet or even being capable of being recognized as a writer. And so whenever I wrote, I just wrote for myself to get ideas out and to think about what this means to me. It was after I had written about 200 poems or so over the period of maybe 5 or 6 years that I realized that I certainly have enough for a collection here. And so in that case, what I did is I just looked over everything I had and I tried to identify themes. And I've said this before, but I really feel this is where, for once, my English Lit major actually helped me out and allowed me to use a skill that was useful. And so I was able to find themes, and then I grouped things together. And and that was a collection. But I don't think I would have been able to envision something from the start and then work towards it or anything like that. And I don't know who does work like that, but that's not the way that I could. And I also fault Alberta for making me doubt myself and therefore not really aim for anything. But ultimately, I think that was the best way for me to approach certainly this first collection of poems, to simply vomit everything within me and then to piece the best ones together. And frankly, it has also helped me out because now I have got like a ton of poems in my vault. I call it my Prince vault, by the way, where I can just reach back there and just pull out another album every 3 years. After I've died, even every 3 years, a new album will come out because I actually have a lot of poems back there that I could still put out. So that's what the process was like for me. I can't tell you what the next one will be like, though.
Yeah, I think process is such a big question. I think I was very similar to Bertrand, where I started out doing poetry as a hobby, and it didn't occur to me that people like me could be published. It's very easy to say, oh, I have a book out, you should read it. And I'm not saying people should, but you have to imagine, like, for me, it was a big deal to even get to the point where someone wanted to publish my work. And at that point, I had a very good friend who runs the Glass Bookshop in Edmonton, Matthew Stepanek, tell me, like, he was like, you probably have enough poems at this point to put into a book. So the first collection is an amalgamation. It isn't a specific theme. I didn't write towards certain ideas. They just end up being who I was in those first 3 years of my career. My next collections, which I'm working on now, kind of simultaneously, are manifestations of the life that I'm living. So my life as a disabled person, my life as someone who seeks out, my life as someone who is hoping to build family and build connections and nurture the people around me. And that collection is very different. It's very deliberate. It has moments of epiphany, but also moments of pressure where I'm pushing at my limits to produce the work I know I'm capable of. And that process has been very difficult at times, and other times very freeing, to have certain goals in mind. And it's a very different thing to write a collection from a theme or from an idea and see what you can do. But I've been influenced by people who have done like project books or books that focus on an aspect of being or a certain type of storytelling. Authors like Claudia Rankin, Jordan Abel, Billy Ray Belcourt, just to name a few, Hanif Abdurraqib. Like, these are people who have certain ideas and then write towards them, and they allow themselves to grow within those goals. And so that's something I'm trying now. But I have this like this not a vault, I would say, but this like assortment of poems that don't fit anywhere else. Like, there's so many poems there, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with these extras, so I just call them like the assorted poems, and maybe that will one day be a collection.
Yeah, I think going back to what Nisha was saying about that sort of assorted poems, and going back to the previous question of somebody asking, how do you get to a particular, into poetry, generally speaking, like into I would say that never delete your stuff. Like, just have, a notes section where you have all of your notes, all of your poems, lines that you like, things like that. It's kind of, it's weird where things will sort of end up, essentially. And so, I think that's a great point. And yeah, sorry, there's two little ones out there, so I'm just kind of trying to navigate the all of the. It was so great to hear Bertrand's and Nisha's answers, and I wish I had a better one, but not right now. So, hurrah!
Those are all great. So we're out of time now. So we really thank you all for coming today. Bertrand, Nisha, and Dallas, thank you so much for joining us virtually. Hopefully one day soon it will be in person. But yeah, thank you everybody for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks y'all. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.